Why do I love Kākāpō? Have you smelt them? They are amazing.
They're critically endangered. Their two main populations are on two offshore islands, and those islands are free of mammal predators.
It was very concerning when we first heard some birds were getting sick.
So Aspergillosis is almost always fatal. So with most wild birds, by the time they look sick, it's too late to save them.
It is so personal. They do wrap themselves around your heart.
We're in this profession because we care. We all, I think, take it really personally when we lose one.
– 2019 was a really special year because it was a breeding season, and this year we had twice as many eggs and twice as many chicks hatch. Certainly a very exciting start to the breeding season. Then we got to the middle of April and fortunes changed for them.
I spent 6 weeks on Pukenui Island helping with the hand rearing of Kākāpō chicks, which was an incredible experience. But then coming back to Auckland Zoo, and I'd only been back for a week or two, and hearing that these chicks were getting sick, ones that we'd put our heart and soul into hand raising and caring for on the island, seeing them being sent up here was just quite devastating.
With more than 80 chicks hatching, we were all prepared for a small number of deaths during the breeding season, which would be normal for any bird that's breeding. But it became really obvious in April that we're dealing with something abnormal.
We had that block where we lost quite a few within a very short period of time. It was quite alarming. The first chick that died was one of my very first chicks that I hand raised, so that was really hard to deal with as well. And then we started finding more chicks that were losing weight. We had another one die on the island, and then there was just a mass emergency. We need to check all of these chicks that are losing weight. It's not because mom's not necessarily feeding them enough, it's actually because they're sick. They started taking blood tests on the island, realizing that a lot of these chicks had high white blood cell counts, and then started to ship these chicks off the island.
Those birds had Aspergillus. That in itself is unusual. There's only been one previous case in 30 years of looking at Kākāpō intensely when they're breeding, and now we had 2 happen within a week. That triggered an investigation like we would have around any dead Kākāpō. In that time, we were very much focused on those individual birds, who were their nest mates, who were living with them, and our focus was very narrow. Then towards the end of April, we very rapidly, over a week, had another 3 or 4 birds die. And so suddenly our focus had to go really wide to all the birds on Whenua, and then we had to really increase our response tenfold.
At that point, we weren't sure if it was going to become a crisis and we would have over 40 birds in hospital. Aspergillosis is a fungal disease, which is actually found everywhere in the environment.
We're breathing them in right now in low levels. And so usually there has to be a fairly rare set of circumstances for those spores to cause disease. And that might be because you're living in a little underground nest with lots and lots of the spores around, or it might be that there's something else stressing you out and dropping your immune system, or it might be a combination of those things.
Not only do we worry about the disease, the concern is what's actually causing it in the first place.
Aspergillus is a really devastating disease to deal with because it's typically rapidly fatal, hard to diagnose and really hard to treat. Ultimately, for the disease to happen, the spores that you breathe in have to invade your lung tissue or your respiratory tract, and they then cause disease. It can kill some birds in a matter of days. The signs we see if it's acute disease, they've got a fast breathing rate, they may be starting to open their beak when they're breathing, they're really struggling to breathe. With more chronic forms, we might see weight loss, lethargy, them going off the food. So Aspergillosis is almost always fatal, particularly in wild animals, in wild birds. The individuals that we are able to treat successfully, we usually do that by identifying them early and treating really aggressively. So lots of different drugs. One of the saving graces with Kākāpō, and particularly this year with it being a breeding season, is these chicks were being looked at every few days. They're being weighed, they're being examined most of the time by people who've looked at hundreds of Kākāpō before. And in fact, many of the birds that came here that have evidence of disease had no weight loss. They were still eating, they're still running around now, and yet we know from the CT scan that there's balls of fungus growing inside them and that without treatment they would die.
It's a huge upheaval for a chick to be taken from a nest, put onto a plane, be flown up to Auckland, go through veterinary procedures in this completely new environment, and then to not have anything wrong with it. So the decision to pull chicks off the island initially was really hesitant because they didn't want to stress these chicks out, but ultimately it was for the best.
So we worked with the Department of Conservation to work out what our relative risk groups were. So we looked at the nests that had birds that were either dead or really sick from Aspergillus, and that led us to bring the initial 13 birds here to Auckland. Unfortunately, all 13 of those birds had evidence of disease, and so we then had to go a little bit wider. And as well as the birds in the at-risk nests, we also took any bird that had any abnormal blood finding. I guess the difficult thing to understand when you're first dealing with birds is that about 3/4 of the birds that we've now diagnosed Aspergillus in had totally normal bloods, no weight loss, normal activity, normal appetite. They seem normal, and yet they're dying. And if we'd have done nothing, they'd have been dead by now. By the time we had 19 birds here, we were pretty full. Luckily, Kākāpō recovery are really well supported, not only by Auckland Zoo, but also by Massey, by Wildbase, and also by Dunedin Wildlife Hospital. And the 3 veterinary hospitals worked together to try and assess them.
It went from having a couple of birds to all of a sudden having this mass crisis on our hand and thinking we were going to have to potentially pull the whole entire island. It was hectic. It was so hectic.
The Kākāpō recovery group send these birds up by Air New Zealand, so they get flown up to us. Once they arrive, then we stabilise them, and then we'll take blood samples and do sort of things like crop washes and more lab tests, and we organise to CT scan them all. It's the least invasive way to diagnose aspergillosis. You can do surgical scoping and take biopsies as well. It's probably the more definitive way, but CT scanning is quite an effective way of diagnosing it without actually having to do any kind of surgery. The veterinary specialist Auckland has very kindly made the Kākāpō a priority, and so we've generally been going there at least once a week with various birds. So initially when we get here we do 1 CT scan on everybody, and then from there we work out how often we need to be scanning each bird to monitor their progress and response to treatment.
There's only 1 CT scanner available for animals routinely in Auckland. Unfortunately, during this response, that scanner wasn't available for a number of weeks, and so we actually worked with Middlemore Hospital, and they were very kind to allow us to take about half the Kākāpō to Middlemore Hospital on a weekend and scan those birds there.
So a CT gives us an overall picture of what's going on inside. We can look at the bone structures, we can look at the lungs, we can look at the soft tissues like the liver and spleen and those sorts of things. And there's a veterinary radiologist in the United States. Her expertise is looking at exotic animals. She can look at those images and write a report, and she's probably the most experienced radiologist looking at Kākāpō's CT scans in the world as well, which is fantastic.
Sometimes on an X-ray or sometimes on a CT scan, you can see a big ball of pus in an airway and you know you've got a big problem. Other times they're real borderline cases, and on CT there's no way of knowing whether that thickness is fat, whether it's scar tissue from a previous infection, or whether actually it's early aspergillosis. Then the next step is to surgically go and place an endoscope into the air sacs, and we should be able to put the little 3mm camera inside and look around, and through the walls of the air sac we should be able to see the organs, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, all that sort of thing. And so several of our birds, we had to do this endoscopy procedure to go and take a biopsy, and then we could tell whether there really truthfully was disease there or not.
Daryl, who's one of the managers of the Kākāpō recovery program, he's kind of like a guru when it comes to Kākāpō. He spent a week with us at the beginning of this whole Aspergillosis crisis when the first batch of sick chicks came up to the zoo. If there's anyone that knows everything about Kākāpō, it's Daryl.
Tonight we'll be treating the birds that we've got here at the zoo. I brought those birds up on just a few days ago from Whenua. They've got respiratory disease, and so we'll nebulise them first, and that takes about half an hour. So this little machine you can see whirring away just here is a nebulizer, and that just atomises the medication inside this little dispenser for this bird tucked in the corner to breathe in. Following that, we'll be feeding the birds, and with the food they will have more antifungal medication as well as an anti-inflammatory.
Let's give it a go.
Being part of the bird team at Auckland Zoo, a lot of skills were learnt that we were very lucky to be able to cross over to this whole issue now. Being able to tube them safely, you need to be able to make up their food according to certain steps. Simple things like draw up medication, for example. You need to be able to restrain the bird. Some of the adults, you need to be able to have a good, solid background in terms of being able to hold a bird.
Nobody likes being in hospital, right? People, animals, most of us would rather be at home relaxing, and so it's sometimes tough for us vets and vet nurses because most animals that are here that we're dealing with, we love them and they either don't like us or hate us. But Kākāpō are amazing patients to have in the hospital because they're really forgiving and they are themselves really patient. So we can handle them and examine them and sometimes even take a blood sample, and at the end of that we can sit them down on our lap and they'll hang around and often eat food out of our hands.
Every time we lose a patient, it's very difficult because you put your heart and soul into them. You just can't avoid getting attached, I feel. That's, we're in this profession because we care. So we all, I think, take it really personally when we lose one. The first chick that we lost was little Waikawa 4B. The problem with Kākāpō and a lot of wild animals is that they can really hide how sick they are. So sometimes it's difficult to accept how sick they actually are, even though you see the CT results and you know in your head and you keep telling yourself how sick they are, but when they look so well outwardly, it almost makes it harder when they don't make it through. So yeah, little Waikawa 4B, when she was one of the first chicks to come up from Island, and she was doing great. Most of her signs had improved and she looked like she was doing really well, and I think we'd all kind of let ourselves really hope that she was gonna make it through, and went in for her lunchtime feed and she had passed, and it's always hard, but it makes it that much harder when it's so unexpected. And
Here at Auckland Zoo we provide the majority of the veterinary care for Kākāpō. So in a population of 150, typically we'll have 1 or 2 come here per year for assessment. Having 1 Kākāpō in the hospital is a lot of extra work for the vets and nurses. So having 22 arrive is an enormous amount of work, and so we needed places to put them, we needed people to feed them and care for them, and we needed vets to diagnose and treat them.
Every time we seemed to sort of get things under control, we would just have a new shipment of birds arrive. It was too much essentially just for the veterinary department to handle.
The wonderful bird team at Auckland Zoo have put in a huge amount of time to look after these birds, so we generally have at least 1 or 2 of their team members working with us every day, and we're so lucky because they're so skilled at handling and caring for birds. Some of the team have been down to the islands and looked after Kākāpō before.
All good. It was just this mass crisis that just needed essentially all hands on deck. So in the beginning, we literally pulled on board any zookeepers that were able to help with the skills that were required in terms of the medicating and the feeding and just new Kākāpō as well. I mean, we needed the maintenance team to build us pens. We had nowhere to put these birds. And you can't house adults together, for example. So for every adult we had to have their own pen.
We have a browse team and horticulture team who are out collecting Kākāpō's favourite browse 3 or 4 times a week. Normally one Kākāpō would be a significant amount of extra browse for the hawk team to find for us, and they had to find browse for 22 birds.
The volleys are amazing. They're like our little guardian angels that just hide in the background and just keep us going. We have so much to do during the day with the birds. It's extensive. The amount of washing that we go through on a daily basis is enormous. So we are so fortunate to have volleys that just do our washing for us so that the next day we have fresh towels and sheets and stuff for the birds to line their pens with. Volleys that are going and just mopping our floors for us. They bring us baking. I mean, we should be bringing them baking.
So it's really been a team effort. We put a request through ZAR, through the Australasian Zoo Association, and we had more than 100 offers of help from keepers, vet nurses and vets through Australasian zoos, British zoos, American zoos. It's a horrible situation to be in, but it's a fantastic industry to work in, I think, where people at the drop of a hat will donate their money and their time and their skill and expertise to help save these critically endangered species. At the end of a normal breeding season, everybody's exhausted, and right at the end came this sucker punch of Aspergillosis. So I guess there's a temptation when you're faced with these problems initially to feel overwhelmed by it.
It's really important to just acknowledge not just the mental and the physical fatigue and resources that goes into doing this, but the emotional side of it as well. It's actually incredibly taxing. And some people are strong and some people are softies like me. But we're doing the best we can.
They are such incredibly special birds to work with. I say that about all of my patients, but particularly the Kākāpō. There's something about them. They're just such charismatic birds and they have such different personalities. If there's any chance that we can help treat them and cure them, then we'll do whatever it takes.
Why would you not do it? We came into this profession because we wanted to save wildlife. We wanted to help the environment. We want to make a difference. To be part of something that is, you're literally in the nitty-gritty part of being able to help save a species. Like that for me is the ultimate. That's all I've ever wanted to do.
The biggest problem I face here, I think, is that most of the vets and nurses worry that they haven't done a good job. And at the end of every day, they all stay an extra hour or two because they're worried they've missed something, they double check stuff, they come in early. I hope that once we're at the end of this Kākāpō response that the vets and nurses in the team here can really look back with a sense of pride about the work that they've put in and that the care that they've offered for the patients, because they should do. If you're working under stress, you can either fall apart or you can pull together, and we're lucky here at Auckland Zoo that we're all able to pull together.
Feeling much more optimistic is pretty incredible. Having been able to send some of these birds back home to the island was very special. We're really hoping that we're coming out the other side of this. Every day that we don't get a new case is a little bit exciting.
So a very exciting morning here at Auckland Zoo. We're just getting ready to send home 3 of our Kākāpō patients. So this is an incredible point to be at. These 3 birds were 3 of the sickest that we got right at the very start in early May, and it's a real miracle that we've managed to get these girls in, get them cured, and now they get to go home.
To have a booming mainland population of Kākāpō would be incredible. I guess it's every conservationist dream. They do say that back in the days you could shake a tree and 12 Kākāpō would fall out anywhere in New Zealand.
If the mainland was predator free, then they might have a fighting chance.
We also need a really good amount of forests as well. These guys have an extensive home range. I've actually literally been in their habitat, you know, in their world, in the bush, watching them. It feels like they're almost like the essence of that island. It's hard to explain.
I think we should feel honoured, really, that we've got the whole population of a country behind us. Actually, not just in New Zealand, you know. We've got children sending us posters from overseas. We've got people doing social media posts from all around the world wishing us well. Outside of Aspergillosis, if there's one chance that Kākāpō have in the long term, it's not because we at Auckland Zoo help some sick ones. The people who can make the real difference are the people in New Zealand, and with 4.5 million people's help, we might just save them.